Hi, I'm Michael Appel for biznews.com. It is fantastic to speak to somebody I haven't spoken to in years, independent analyst Dr. Frans Cronje. When BizNews last spoke to you, Frans, that headline read, Dr. Frans Cronje, optimistic that SA economy is on brink of post-ANC rejuvenation. Does that headline still ring true, or has your latest report that you've been involved in, the Social Research Foundation, the SRF, made waves over the weekend? Is that headline still true? Are you still as very optimistic as you were when you last spoke to BizNews?
Quite. That wouldn't change. I mean, I was aware of the content of that report. We might not have finalized it at that stage. But I was aware of the data in that at the time that we spoke to Alex. So absolutely, it hangs true. Look at the direction of drift. That's the point. 25 years ago, South Africa becomes a democracy. It does that for one big reason, that if a point is ever again reached in the future of the country where it's not well governed, to the advantage of the majority of its people, they will have the ability to do something about that. Now, 2004, the ANC goes to a peak politically of 69% under Thabo Mbeki. Things are getting better in the country. Life's improving. The ANC is being rewarded. We're now polling the ANC amongst registered voters at below 50%. And then when we start creating election scenarios, people who are likely to vote and factoring voter turnout levels, the highest we can get the ANC to is 52. So it's a good, let's say, 20 points off the peak that it was at as a consequence of the manner in which the country is being governed. So if you look at direction of travel, the data is unambiguous, and a few points here or there won't change that. That there is a reform movement in the country. There is a social compact in the country, and the sort of hues and cries from business and other observers that something must be done, someone must do something. It is very well advanced. And it is moving really quickly, and perhaps the extent of that is best brought out in a stat we produced recently, that if only urban South Africans could vote, the ANC would get 30%. If rural South Africans only voted, the ANC would get about a 2/3 majority. Rural people, older, lower living standards, better living memory of the apartheid era, which is good, useful for the ANC, because in relative terms, there's the appreciation of the extent to which things improved in the country after 94. But South Africa is a country that's urbanizing. It's a country with a younger population. It's a country where levels of education, despite the school system, are improving, where income levels have increased pretty quickly, and where any of that starts to happen, really the manifestation of the ANC's election promise of a better life for all of 25 years ago, that party's getting hammered. And I don't think that trend in the greater scheme of things is going to be reversed. And it's so deeply and well established that you can rely on it to start making long-term projections about the country, Michael.
The decline of the ANC is there for all to see. But I think what your report highlights is that there are many who are writing the obituary of the ANC. Do you think that is premature? Because we are looking at 2024. Are you looking at 2024, or are you looking at 2029 for this post-ANC rejuvenation?
Well, 2024, absolutely. Let's start there. It's been a long-term call. I think in 2012 was the first time on the record in print that the observation was made. We think the ANC can lose its majority, and the year was 2024, and that was quite a thing to do, because this was based on the nascent trends. We could already begin to see what was happening amongst better educated people and urban people, and could extrapolate that against population growth and the likes, and now we actually see it in real time. It's straightforward from the political data how to beat the ANC. This is no longer a difficult thing. It's no longer a mystery. There's no longer need for any deep strategy or how might it happen. If opposition parties in the country pull together, the bulk of those, in a direction that brings about modest initially but sustained improvements in people's standards of living, the ANC has no chance at all. The factor, therefore, that will determine whether the ANC wins in 2024 or not is not really anything the ANC itself might do. It's a question of whether the people who wish to beat it are able to pull together sufficiently to shore up public confidence in coalition options. That is the unknown factor at the moment. And if the ANC does cling on for one further term, the reason for that will be in the main that South Africa's opposition players could not get it together to pull together mainly, not always, they don't have to become one organization or anything. They could create a broad sort of a loose affiliation and call it something. That might be a very good idea for them. But in that event, the data is absolutely unambiguous, and we're going to be putting out a lot more of this over coming weeks. In fact, in about a week or so, we'll put out a report on exactly this point. If that were to happen, the ANC has no chance at all. So 2024 is very much in play, and it depends on what South Africa's opposition parties do in the 600 days between now and then.
And it's no mystery to the ANC, this phenomenon you're talking about. It's no longer in the hands of the ANC to do anything better. It's to let the coalitions, if you're the ANC, you sit back and watch them destroy themselves, because the national policy documents of the ANC at their national policy conference, they have made a concerted effort to rubbish coalitions as fragmented, as nothing gets done, as you need this one-party state to be able to get things done. It's in their interests that these coalitions fail. I see Vasco da Gama being voted out as Speaker of City of Joburg today, ANC saying Umpopalatse is next. They're looking to make inroads to get back to that one-party state status, I suppose.
That's correct. The ANC strategy has to be, and it will be, discredit the coalition option sufficiently in the minds of voters that you depress coalition turnout. And if you do that, then there's a chance, not a guarantee. There's a look. The best we can do for the ANC now on very low turnout, very low, uniquely low, is we can take them to 52%. But the ANC strategy has to be to discredit the coalition option. This is the balance, the watershed. This is the thing you must watch. Does the coalition option carry credibility into 2024 and rising credibility or diminishing credibility? And on that, you have the result of the 2024 election.
Let's get into those figures. For anybody who hasn't seen the SRF's report, it was all over the weekend papers. And actually, one point, when we were talking off air, you said you were surprised by a little think tank putting out this report, how it was received. I think South Africans are dying for information to make sense of contemporary South Africa and what the next 2 years holds. Were you shocked, astounded by this?
In a way, yes, perhaps. I mean, the SRF is a very small little think tank group that was put together. Most are modest and thought, well, I came out of the think tank world. Let's stay in that game a bit almost in a modest way and produce some data. Perhaps we'll get a mailing list of 30 or 40 people who will find us interesting. And it's attracted a bit of attention in the past week, which I suppose it's a good thing, yes.
Well, I suppose the attention-grabbing headline is the 52%. Now, on what voter turnout is that based?
It's 56, and then amongst likely voters. So there are a whole lot of things one can do when you poll. If you give me a minute, quick polling. There's been some polling in the media in the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks in South Africa says the ANC is at 40%. Some of that's done by groups that are very good. Their data is good, their analyses are good. But I found that in some of the media reporting, I don't want to speak on behalf of these groups, the manner in which their data was reported was, to my mind, inaccurate. The reporting, not the data. You can test opinion amongst all South Africans, but, only X% of South Africans are registered to vote.
Yeah.
And of those, only X% actually do vote. And when you start to filter those variables, you get very different results. So we test only registered voters to begin with. And there we put the ANC at about, I think, 46 or 47%. And then we ask a battery of related questions. Did you vote before? Are you likely to vote again? And many, long batteries of questions. And from there, we can get to, of the registered voters, which are likely voters. And then we can create different turnout scenarios depending on the mood in the country. Are you so inspired by the manner in which the coalition are pulling together to save the country that you get out of bed at sunrise, crack of dawn on election day and go and vote? Or are you so disillusioned? Because this is what the ANC is going to have to do. The ANC is going to have to convince the voting public that the coalition is going to be so wracked with infighting, conflict, sabotage and delay that is really not a different option to us. We're pretty much the same. Based on that, you then get voter turnout, and as you factor all those numbers together, you get to a election result. Now, my rough calculation, now certainly you speak to these other pollsters yourselves, is that even on the data that was reported as the ANC at 40% in the South African media, when you start to factor that for registered voters and turnout, you're actually getting back to numbers that are very similar to the ones that we've produced, where as a best case, low turnout, 56%, likely voters, ANC's just over the line at 52% or so. But, the right way to think about it now is the ANC's right on that knife edge, and the conflict, the debate, the battleground politically is the public going to believe 600 days from now that the coalition option is a good, workable option that will bring about rapid improvements in my life? If that happens, the ANC number is under 50. If that does not happen, the ANC number could well be above 50.
So the ball is literally in the opposition party's courts. Do you believe that they appreciate the very pressing nature of what they're trying to build in this country?
At times. Look, think of the ANC another way. What do you need to govern a country? You need electricity. Well, we're short of that, way short. Some estimates that I've done suggest that if we were to aspire to rates of growth that emulate comparable emerging markets 10, 15 years from now, the shortfall here could be 75% of current production. It's a very serious problem. You need, if you're going to govern well, you need popular confidence in your leadership. Now, you've read some of our reports, particularly where we've done sort of focus group style research into ANC vote awards. And there's no confidence. If you ask an ANC voter, what do you think of your party? The great majority of ANC voters say they're hopeless and worse. I'm trying to maintain a degree of decorum on yours. The ANC voters aren't as diplomatic as that.
Yeah.
In fact, the interviews with ANC voters are such that it's there's no doubt that you must now distinguish between ANC voters and ANC supporters. And an ANC voter is no longer an ANC supporter. It's not someone who supports the behavior, the results, the performance of the party that they vote for. They're busy with a long migration, divorce, in fact, is the right analogy, away from the ANC itself. You need, if you're going to govern well, you need global credibility. You don't have that in the ANC at all anymore. If you travel to any serious corner of the world. You don't confront that. The ANC was carried to power on the shoulders of South Africa's media and civil society. There was great confidence, strong endorsements. That's gone. The business community was initially, there's been this false kind of confidence in the ANC, but even that has been eroded. You need money if you want to govern a country. The budget deficit on some of projections that I've done is set under, if we lose the current finance minister particularly, to emulate debts the country's only seen on 3 previous occasions. First is the most recent after Pierre Botha's Rubicon speech in 1985, and then in the Second and the First World Wars. So you need an intellect. You need an intellect sufficient to think your way out of the problem. And if you read the products of ANC policy conferences, you have precisely the opposite. So you don't have electricity and you don't have enough money. And the media and civil society have lost confidence in you, and your own voters are no longer your supporters. And you don't have the intellect to think your way out of this. And in serious places around the world, people don't take you seriously anymore. If I describe to you any other entity, Michael, let's forget that we're talking about politics. Let's call this a football team, or let's call this a business, a mining house, a retailer, the leadership at war with each other. Board meetings descend into physical fights. Assassinations take place. And I said to you, what is the long-term prognosis? You know what the answer is. Mm-hmm. And the data we started with in this chat this morning establishes that very firmly. The direction of travel, so important, is one way here. It's a question of when does it slip below 50 finally, 2024, 2029, and to, these points are quite good, useful to corroborate. That question now depends to, I think, a greater extent to the people trying to supplant the ANC than to any actions the ANC itself might still be able to take to save itself.
You've mentioned the shadow of Jacob Zuma that continues to loom very large over the ANC. Ramaphosa is on shaky ground by some estimates. Pala, Public Protector's report, motions of no confidence, potentially an ad hoc committee that'll remove him from office based on certain findings at some point. He's facing internal revolt from one faction of his party. Tell me about Jacob Zuma and this looming presence he still holds based on what we spoke about with KZN.
Okay, let's talk about political leaders. You can ask people, how do you feel about them? You like them a lot, a little, somewhat, not at all, strongly opposed to them. If you do that, Mr. Ramaphosa has a national favorability score of people who are a share of 100% who think he's great. I'm simplifying it a little bit, of about 50%. A typical opposition leader is sitting somewhere in the 20s, 22, 23 on the low end, and then 25, 26 towards the middle. The most popular opposition leader on this score, in fact, now is Mmusi Maimane, who's just on 30, I think. So Mr. Ramaphosa is the most popular guy. He's got about 50 opposition leaders in the 20s. Mmusi's at 30. And then you go to Natal. Jacob Zuma, mid-50s. I think he's mid-50s. He might be a bit higher, but let's say mid-50s. And Mr. Ramaphosa, very unpopular. Now, we're polling the ANC in Natal at 45%. If you lose Natal as the ANC, you lose a great deal. You essentially split your organization. I don't see how the ANC can be confident on Natal without using Jacob Zuma prominently in their campaign, because he's the most popular guy there by a long shot. Yet, if you do that, you depress your performance in the sort of urban centres. But in any event, in Gauteng now, I think it's gone for the ANC. We've got them there at about 30. So I don't think there's a comeback in any event on Gauteng for them. But it demonstrates one of the many fissures. You spoke of factions in the ANC. You also think of fissures within the ANC. And one of those now is that the party as it stands in Natal and the party and the bulk of the rest of the country hold very different views and opinions about questions of leadership, and uniting that broad divide is strategically a daunting challenge for an ANC sort of election strategist. Michael?
You're speaking about Jacob Zuma being used on a campaign platform for the ANC going into the national elections, and you'd think, no, the man is facing corruption charges. There's no way in hell anybody would ever think that. But I think back to my time in Brazil. I was there just before the national elections where Jair Bolsonaro got voted in. The opposition candidate was a guy in jail called Lula da Silva. He was in jail campaigning, and he's subsequently been released. But the court ruled that, no, you can't stand for president while you're in jail. He had a heck of amount of support while being in prison that Fernando Haddad, his second in command, had to run for the PT, the Workers' Party. But thinking, oh no, somebody's facing corruption charges. This guy was in jail and he was still pretty up there in the favorability ratings. It's not unthinkable. But would the ANC actually do that?
Well, I mean, if it wishes to be confident in Natal, it doesn't have much of a choice.
Sure.
I mean, these are the terrible dilemmas you begin to face as a consequence of broadly just not governing the country very well.
Mm.
You drive people to points of relative desperation. Half of young people without a job, growth nowhere, real per capita GDP is slumping, state services very disappointing, any interaction with those. It's these impossible dilemmas are the consequences of that. They're the final. There's this thing I said to you a moment or so ago that, if this was a football team and I described this to you, would I tell you, does this thing have a great future ahead of it? And you know the answer. And I mean, death throws perhaps a bit hard, but maybe not far off. These would not be dilemmas the ANC faced. If the economy was drawing the investment necessary to create the jobs, to secure sustained, even if modest, increases in living standards. And we know that. We know it because it happened. Between 1994 and 2007, we did have, in relative to today, let's do it that way, a pragmatic to moderate policies, consequence of which is that the economy began to grow quite quickly. By 2047, it's growing at 5%. Does so for 4 consecutive years. First time that had happened since the first half of the 1960s. So it was a thing. And through that first 15 years in government, the ANC doubled the number of people with jobs. And it was able to finance the rollout of its very impressive social welfare net, not through spending lavishly, but through actually running up a budget surplus. And if that confounds you, how do the two fit together? The saving on the government's interest bill was sufficient to finance much of the initial rollout of the social welfare net. And so it was quite pragmatic and actually quite successful. And the service delivery figures, I mean, I've long said, much better than the ANC itself, even to today, I think, understands. And as a consequence of life getting better, ANC support in 2004, as we also said earlier, today reached almost 70%, 69, 6 points higher than when Mandela had led that party to liberation in 1994. That's the formula and the model. It is easy, and it works really well. And if the ANC had fallen back on that formula at any point since sort of started to lose its way, to a great extent lost its way after the departure of Mr. Mbeki, it wouldn't face these dilemmas today. Mm-hmm. These dilemmas arise from that set of relationships. Pragmatic policy draws investment, raises growth, raises living standards. That series of events, that sort of chain is no longer present. And when you don't have that chain, then you end up having to deal with consequences such as the question of Mr. Zuma and Natal versus how Mr. Zuma is regarded in some other corners of the country.
Frans, where do you come down on independent candidates and the role that they potentially play in 2024? Are they going to be game changers, or are they going to be picking up the scraps?
It's a bit tough, if you're on your own to pick up sufficient votes to put yourself into play as a serious option politically. So the way around that would be to sort of arrange them in a loose affiliation, a sort of networked political structure that has some of the infrastructure that allows them to succeed, and then possibly it can work. That's how I would see that, Michael.
Kind of like the One South Africa movement, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. The main opposition party, the DA, I saw from the polling research that they have a stigma that they simply cannot shake. And that is that people don't trust them, and they think they're going to bring apartheid back if the DA was to get into power. That despite the facts showing that the DA is the most racially diverse party in the country, more diverse than the EFF, definitely, more diverse than the ANC by a long shot, and any other party. But they have a stigma they cannot shake. What is going on there?
Okay, here you ask a very interesting question. It's fascinating. I will try and answer. You say the DA is the most diverse party in the country. That's right. It appears from the numbers in our possession that the DA does not draw more than a third of its votes from any single race group.
Yeah,
that's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. If you ask, and I'm aware that these numbers I'm about to quote at you haven't seen yet, because we're just sort of mining them at the moment. Mm-hmm. If you ask, do word associations, so you say, with which party do you associate this phrase or word? So good governance or good policies or accountability. The DA comes out on top mostly amongst registered voters, neck and neck often with the ANC, which, given the different share of the vote they draw, is very significant. So even ANC supporters, voters, lean to saying, well, the DA is better than that. If you then go on and say with which party do you associate the word racist, the DA comes in neck and neck with the EFF. I think the EFF comes out number one on that score. The DA a bit behind. If you then go a step further and say words like violence and division, then the EFF's way on top and the DA's not there. So here you have these are the factors. The DA's voter base is completely racially diversified. Voters disproportionately think that the DA governs better and has better policy and better ideas. But voters think that the DA is a racist party, organisation, to a more significant extent than you would believe based on the first 2 points that I've made. Looking deep into these spreadsheets for weeks and weeks, in my opinion, what is happening is this: that ANC voters, realizing their party has lost its ways, betrayed them, makes them very angry, can no longer meet their expectations, start to look around at alternatives. They have bought the ANC voting base two of the DA's major political sort of talking points. We're not corrupt and we govern better. And I think in the main, ANC voters now accept that. Say it's correct. A significant portion of them do, and increasingly so. They accept that. But there's a sense that in the sort of what might be perceived as the hyper-competitive economy and political system the DA might bring about, I'm now as saying we as ANC supporters are not certain that we have what it takes to be competitive there. And we fear being left on the periphery of that society. And the sort of image that's conjured up, it was in fact conjured up in a focus group of ANC voters that we were party to, is a society is then created of a relatively comfortable elite, even multiracial elite of DA voters in the sort of centre, in the sort of living the sort of good life of Cape Town, and this periphery of the relative poor. And even if it's further conceded that on that poor periphery, life might not. It's be better than under the ANC. There might be more menial jobs. There might be less looting of public resources. There might be more public safety. It still feels so much. Now we're into my opinion here. It feels so much like the old colonial dynamic that it's very, very difficult for that wavering ANC voter to step all the way across the political divide and endorse that. And when an ANC voter says we perceive the DA as racist, I think a lot of what motivates that comment is not the crass, crude idea of racially segregationist, abusive. I don't think that's it at all. I think it's this idea that there'll still be an insider-outsider dynamic to the country, even though it runs better. So there's a strategic, we spoke about the strategic challenge that faces the broader opposition to sell the idea of coalition. We spoke about the ANC's strategic challenge now, or two of those. One is to discredit coalitions. The second is to deal with the question of Natal and Mr. Zuma. DA's strategic challenge, to my mind, is interesting because I think the party's big selling point, better governance, clean governance, are broadly accepted. But they've got to get past this idea that if we did that, if that became a feature of government, it would leave us on the periphery. And I mean, that's an insight that I've drawn out of sitting over some of this political data this year. But we'll have a few reports that begin to explore those ideas that emerge over coming weeks.
Well, I see John Steenhuisen is... Maybe he's listening in, because one of the latest conversations I heard with him, he was saying, we are not going to take away your social grants. We are not going to do away with that. Wherever we govern, in fact, people have a higher standard of living and they still get their grants, etc., etc. Lastly, the levels of despondency amongst the South African electorate. I had to have a giggle at 80% of those who associate themselves as EFF voters. They're angry. They are pretty. They're sulking. They reckon over the next decade things are going to get, quote unquote, much worse. What did that data show? 46%.
You've done the diagnosis. You've got the diagnosis spot on. Angry voters. There was a point made to me by very brilliant pollsters that we commission. It's an angry voter. You're right. You got it. That's not great though for the EFF, is it?
No.
Because how long can you remain angry, etc. And the EFF has a bit of a ceiling. It sits at sort of 10, 11, 12. We've got it at 11 or 12 at the moment. We've long argued before this, before what I do now, that public opinion in South Africa is far more moderate than people understand. And that remains true. It stands out in the data. There's vast respect that South Africans carry for each other. across every fissure of history and politics and socioeconomics. That's undoubtedly true. And that the EFF struggles to break well above 10% in a country where half of young people, more than that, don't have a job, is quite something. It's not a guarantee it always remains that way. Radical populism remains a long-term danger for the country. That's certainly true. I in fact think that what worries me is we might have one big shot at a coalition alternative to the ANC. Mm-hmm. If that coalition comes to power, let's on a national level, wins the union buildings. Imagine that. ANC's gone. A new lot are in charge. If they don't do very well early on and through their 5 years in office, the consequence of that will be to dash public confidence in the idea of democracy itself. It's very dangerous if that were to happen, because following from that, you open the way to large-scale populism. People could say, you tried 94, you tried Ramaphosa and the ANC in various guises, you tried the alternative. Life is still very difficult. We have something for you, and then we might flip on populism. And while sitting on this point, a lot of groups might talk to me are very eager on 2024. We must have 2024. Are you feeling it's not 2024? It will be a disaster. More important for me is that when the ANC is defeated, that there is great confidence that the people who are going to supplant it will right off the bat get South Africa back on the kind of growth and recovery track that the ANC got it on after 94. Because if that does, that's the greater danger than it would be much more dangerous to replace the ANC with an unstable coalition with no real policy framework that would spend 5 years squabbling amongst each other than to live out another election cycle of the ANC itself. And just on that, the media is a treacherous terrain. I say things to people. I must also just add, for the record, we don't have to go into it now, that I don't necessarily believe that supplanting the ANC en masse and chasing it into the wilderness is the wisest course of action, and that in a future coalition, the ANC can have many guises. There are some interesting corners of it. I mean, quite small corners, but there are. A future coalition must not only be thought of as a way of banishing the ANC into the wilderness forever, creating some room if the right types of the ANC are still around after a defeat for them in coalition, would, I think, be a wise and pragmatic course of action.
So more detrimental to South Africa than an ANC staying in power is an alternative that comes into power and doesn't work.
That is what I believe, yeah.
Very lastly, are the EFF natural bedfellows for the ANC? I've seen Julius Malema make those comments. He's extending an olive branch. He's willing to work with the ANC to give them that majority if they're under 50. What do you think of that?
Of course, it comes from the same place. Policy offering is not fundamentally different. The EFF or the RET guys and the ANC, or the more non-RET ideological left of the ANC. I think early on the idea was to leave Luthuli House and create a balance of power outside of it that would force the ANC to beg the EFF to return. Strategically, let's talk about EFF strategy for a moment. It would be nice to get back access to the patronage networks, the cash flows that come from that. It's all attractive. But do you weld yourself to the collapsing sort of building of the ANC, or is its the direction of travel? Is that as firmly established as I've suggested to you? In which case, if you join up with it, it pulls you down, and that would be the strategic one of the strategic challenges that faces the EFF people. But yeah, natural bedfellows. But these are bright guys.
Yeah.
These are high caliber political operators. They're good on strategy. The EFF guys, very, very good. And this is one of the things they would have to bring into consideration.
So they attach themselves to the flagpole of the sinking HMS ANC so that they stick out above the top of the water while the rest of the ship sinks.
It's a very deep ocean.
Dr. Frans Cronje, thank you. Thanks for allowing us to mine your brain. Fascinating report. I look forward to the next one.
Brilliant. Michael, thank you very much.